Okay, great. So thank you everyone for coming along to Edinburgh Futurists tonight. Just as a bit of a background, I think we've got quite a few new people attending Edinburgh Futurists. So I just wanted to give a quick background, and then I will hand over to Rob for his presentation. So Edinburgh Futurists is a branch of UFO, so the European Futures Observatory, and we aim to create an open and diverse group. So our events are completely free to come along to, and it's all about kind of learning and engaging. So tonight Rob will be giving a talk, and then for the next 30 minutes, so the final 30 minutes, we will then have a question and answer. So if anyone has any comments that they want to make, please could we just wait until the end. And now I'll hand over to Rob.
Thank you very much, and a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. So my name's Rob. I'm the Communities and Art Lead at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, or DEAL. And as the Communities Lead, my role is to support people who are coming together around the ideas of Doughnut Economics and those who want to bring the ideas into their existing community groups. I first heard about Doughnut Economics when I was working for the Co-operative Group in the UK in Manchester, when we were looking at the question of what does it mean for the co-op, what's the role of the co-op in the 21st century? And when we were looking into that question, the deeper we went into it, the more I started looking into the economic assumptions that underpinned it. I ended up taking time out to then research and explore regenerative economics more, and including the role of our imagination, our collective imagination, and being able to think about alternative systems. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is Doughnut economics and community action, and specifically some of the core ideas and how they're being used by communities around the world to recognize and put into action your individual and collective power and agency. So to start, I'm going to take a big step back and have a look at how the 21st century has begun, because it's been a turbulent 20 years with repeated crises, from the financial meltdown in 2008 through to the current climate and ecological breakdown and the recent COVID lockdown. And what these multiple crises are telling us is that we are deeply interconnected with each other and with the natural world. They're exposing sharp inequalities in race, gender, power, and wealth, both within nations and across nations, global north and global south. And they're showing us that these crises are arising largely out of the systems we've created, and systems that we can recreate, we can reimagine. Systems that have been largely based on the assumption of endless expansion of a financial system, of an industrial and energy system, an endless expansion of our reach into natural ecosystems. We have to ask the question, is this the shape of progress we want for the 21st century? And instead, I want to offer you a different shape, which is that of the doughnut, whose goal is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet, instead of endless expansion of a shape of balance, with the center looking at the essentials of a good life: water, food, health, education, political voice, equality and equity. These have been crowdsourced from the UN Sustainable Development Goals, created by 193 nations' governments, meaning all those citizens have a claim to these. So leaving no one falling short on the essentials of life in the hole in the middle, and at the same time, not overshooting the planetary boundaries and Earth's life-supporting systems on the outside. These have been taken from the Earth System Scientists' 9 planetary boundaries. So this is the doughnut, indicating the safe and just space for humanity in the middle. And if it's our target for the 21st century, we are far from it now, with the red in the middle indicating billions of people are falling short on life's essentials, whilst at the same time we're collectively overshooting on multiple planetary boundaries. We're the first generation to see this. And so it's our choice to look at whether we want to continue with the systems we've inherited, or whether it's time to rethink and reimagine our economic thinking, our policies, our business models, and what those mean to bring us back into balance from both sides. I want to give a couple of ways to think that will help us get there. Firstly, being regenerative by design, moving away from the degenerative linear industrial system we've inherited, where we take Earth's resources, we make things we want, use them for a while, sometimes only once, and then throw them away, towards a regenerative system where we work with and within the cycles of the living world. That means renewable energy, where waste from one process becomes food for the next, where we restore and repair and recognize we don't have to own everything to have access and use them. So regenerative by design. And the second, distributive by design, moving away from the divisive and centralizing systems that concentrate wealth, opportunity and power in the hands of a few, giving rise to the 1% and dramatic inequalities, and moving towards systems that are distributive and networked by design, where value and opportunity are shared far more equitably amongst all those who co-create it, and power and agency flow amongst the network. So these are two ways to think that might help us get towards the donut. And there are so many emerging examples of this around the world. And this is the global view of the donut. But what happens when we downscale it to the national level? Well, it's a very varying picture. From low to middle to high income countries, we can see we all have our own challenges, whether falling short on multiple social needs or overshooting on multiple planetary boundaries. There is no one single country that is within the space of the donut. So we all have our own challenges and all have our own path of progress. But what it does show us that whether you are low, middle, or high income countries, we are all developing countries now. So this is the national view. What happens if we take it the step further down and take it to our place, our communities, our towns, our cities, where we have agency for change? I want to ask you a question here tonight. It's a very big question, which is, how can your community be home to thriving people in a thriving place whilst respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? So to help break that really big question down, I'm going to break it down into 4 areas. Firstly, what would it mean for the people of your community to thrive? Now, only you can answer that question, given your unique values, culture, history, and aspirations for what it means to live a good life. Secondly, what would it mean for your community to thrive within its natural habitat? So where on earth is your place? What unique spot does it occupy? And what is nature's genius in that place? How does it sequester carbon, store groundwater, cycle nutrients, clear the air, house biodiversity, regulate temperature? What is the genius of its place? And how can we learn from that? How can we use nature as mentor and measure in the way we design our own places? So that's our local aspiration, thriving people, thriving place. But we must recognize that our places aren't islands unto themselves. We are deeply connected with the planet, and we draw in Earth's resources and energy from elsewhere. So we have to ask at the same time, what's our global responsibility? And what would it mean for your community to respect the health of the whole planet? So thinking about the clothes we wear, the food we eat, the electronics we use, the construction materials for the houses we build. Where do those, what is the energy and material bound up in all of those? And how can we bring that back in within planetary boundaries? And then think again of the clothes, food, electronics, and buildings, and think about the people in those processes. And what would it mean for your community to respect the well-being of people worldwide? Who stitched and sewed your clothes? Who picked and packed your food? Who dug and transported your construction materials? Who's at the other end of that product, the other end of that material? And when you throw something away, who is at the other end of that away? These are the 4 lenses of downscaling the donut to a place. And they've been pioneered by the cities of Philadelphia, Portland, and Amsterdam. And these are pictures from the workshops where city policymakers and residents have come together to look at this holistic picture and spotting for the first time the multiple interconnections and working together in a new way, which is revealing so many new opportunities and possibilities. Amsterdam launched this city portrait in April last year. And then we published the methodology behind it in July. And immediately we had over 500 expressions of interest from around the world, which demonstrated us the power of peer-to-peer inspiration. But it wasn't just at the city scale. We saw it was an idea that was inspiring people at all scales, from neighborhood to nation and all scales in between. But it doesn't necessarily just look like this stack of donuts here on the right. with one nested in the other. It's more messy than that. It's a bit more like this picture here, where the donuts of different scales and colors are all bumping up against each other and overlapping. And it asks us the question, well, what is the type of governance that's going to be needed for this more complex way of organizing? But in the same way as it can't be applied at all scale, it can be applied at all scales, it's also being initiated from lots of different actors within places. So Philadelphia, Portland, and Amsterdam was from the city government, but actually we're seeing communities spontaneously gather around these ideas. And today, here are just a few of the examples of communities that have gathered together, given themselves a name and an identity, and are beginning to put these ideas into practice where they are. They are pioneers of this new way of working, and they're inspiring other people in the network, in the community globally. And they're using, on the right-hand side, these donut principles of practice to ensure the integrity of the ideas of donut economics, and the ways in which they're put into practice are used with integrity. And so I'm going to call
Are your auctions on already?
So I'm going to call on 4 of these examples to bring them to life, which is that from Melbourne, Devon, Cambridge, and Costa Rica. So starting with Melbourne, they've used the 4 lenses to ask, what's our vision for our place? They've done this in 3 ways, starting with a desk exercise, looking what's all the available research and data that might help us populate the 4 lenses. Secondly, they are having roundtable exercises with conversations with experts in the city and prominent city members. And thirdly, they are having community workshops. And they've just finished their 5th, where they've come up with what the people of Melbourne think it means to be a thriving people in their thriving place. And this is a visual that an artist has scribed for those conversations, what it means to be an empowered Melbourne. And this beautiful visual for their vision has inspired other people within their community, a group of knitters, to come together and actually take all 5 of the visions they've created and combine it into one giant tapestry. And it's that kind of inviting way of bringing people to these ideas that is so inspiring. Secondly, what are the common challenges we face? So Costa Rica is the country that is closest to being in the donut, but they still have their challenges. And they are using the 4 lenses to look at the long-term view of tourism and agriculture, how they can become regenerative tourism and regenerative agriculture. And their community are engaging with 11 municipalities and the mayors of those places to look at public policy at the local level. Who are the people working to bring about change? Now, the Cambridge Doughnut Economics Action Group have used the donut and recognized its simplicity and accessibility enables lots of people to come together, lots of people who are working towards this same goal. And so they've mapped them here just illustratively around the donut. And they're recognizing both peer-to-peer networks and multi-stakeholder networks can all come together, individuals, groups, organizations, which means that we can collectively have far greater chance of moving this way. But also they are using the power of arts to speak to the people in Cambridge who aren't part of these groups, and have created this donut stop that they're going to be using this summer when they put it out in the street, and they're going to be asking people what their view is on to be a thriving people in a thriving place. Looking at Devon, they're looking at how can we capture the diversity across the county, recognizing that there are loads of different places of different urban and rural nature which have different identities. And so they're holding these series of coffee and donut sessions where they're inviting everyone to come along and have their say. And they're thinking, actually, do we create a box of Devon donuts? And they're going to be having a donut hack to explore different ways of looking at it, and culminating in a People's Donut Assembly in the summer. So those are 4 examples of groups that are coming together. And when they come together, people are being invited not to come with the hat of the organization that they're a part of, the business that they work for. Instead, come as an individual, come as who you are, and contribute as who you are. But who we are in the economy changes all the time. We have multiple economic identities, and we need to really recognize and value what those are. So I'm going to introduce you to a diagram which helps unpick those. It's called the embedded economy diagram. And it shows the economy is embedded within society, which is embedded within the living earth, drawing in energy and matter and spewing out waste matter and heat. Looking in the center, we see within the economy, there are 4 areas of economic provisioning. Traditional economics, mainstream economics, starts with the market, where we are consumer, producer, labor, or capital, based on the assumption that we operate like rational economic man, with self-interest at heart, calculator in head, and wallet in hand. It's a very narrow view of all of the ways we contribute to the economy. Instead, in the state, we are public servant, resident, voter, protester. In the household, we are parent, partner, relative, child. In the commons, we are volunteer, sharer, co-creator, steward. And when COVID came last year and the market wasn't able to operate as normal, it showed the rest of them and it put into focus the other areas. So the state coming in and supporting immediately. Within the household, taking on the extra burden of caring responsibilities, people working from home, and then education and people picking up the homeschooling responsibilities, but also the resurgence of the commons and people coming together to create mutual aid groups, food banks, volunteering groups, and people connecting with other people on their street via WhatsApp groups and things like that. It really showed the power of the we rather than the individual me of rational economic man. And it's this we that people realize we want to keep a hold of this. You know, we've reminded ourselves what this feels like. So how can we carry that forward? So we have power and agency in all of these individual roles within the market, state, household, and commons as we move between them within a day and across the week. But what power and agency do we collectively have as the we? So the last thing I want to show you is a signboard of 5 ways to think about the power and agency we have collectively. The first of them is purpose. What power and agency do we have to collectively create and socialize a shared vision of our place? So a lot of places in the UK, at least, have declared a climate emergency. And from that, the next step is to set a really compelling target, such as net zero by 2030, which mobilizes a lot of people around it. But how can you come together to create a shared vision that is inviting and irresistible and imaginative, like this one in Melbourne? It invites people to contribute to it and recognize their role in realizing it. Secondly, networks. I've already spoken about how at Cambridge you're using this. And so what is the power and agency we have collectively to convene, engage, and mobilize diverse local stakeholders? And when we make space for all of this diversity, you know, how do we hold these multiple conversations and recognize the multiple interconnections across them? Thirdly, and really importantly for decision-making, is what is our collective power and agency to shape and enforce policy? So recently, we've seen the rise in deliberative democracy, both in UK and abroad, and citizens' assemblies as a way for people of the place to come together and take longer term decisions. We're seeing people take far longer term decisions than the usual electoral cycles that politicians are able to take. But also relating to policy, what ways can we hold politicians to account and actually host policy debates like they've done here with the Doughnut Economics advocates in New Zealand? And that's being mimicked as well by the group in Germany, and Cambridge are looking to do that as well for the May elections in the UK. But governance is also largely dictated by the next one, which is ownership. And what's our power and agency to collectively own, access, or operate local assets and services? This covers so many areas. Who owns the land and housing? Who owns our data, our energy, transport, business, and so much more? And there are loads of brilliant new ways of thinking about ownership that is collectively managed, governed, and where we collectively agree our purpose. But also beyond these, who owns our finance? Is finance service to purpose and to thriving, or is purpose in service to finance? Finance dictates all of those above. And so what's our power and agency to collectively raise, influence, and direct finance? For example, to raise finance with community shares, to influence it via participatory budgeting like they do in Barcelona, to direct finance via local procurement and creating local cooperatives that local government can direct public service spending towards. And direct finance also via saving to regional banking, regional banks that have a purpose aligned with yours. And so those are some of the ways we can collectively recognize our power and agency. So in seeing these models, you might now be thinking, well, how on earth do we start? And so I want to offer just a few ways that we've been seeing so far with Doughnut Economics Action Lab. First of all, to connect with others, whether in your city, your region, or your country. We're seeing this as a natural starting point. If you have the energy around this, you want to connect with others who have the energy too. To deepen your learning, and the Irish Doughnut Economics Network have created a book club where people are learning together by reading the chapters of the book week by week and then coming back and presenting what they've found. To create a shared vision. So we've looked at the 4 lenses of downscaling the donut. So how can you use this to frame your vision for your place? Explore these frameworks, but also explore the framework of the 4 lenses to look at your vision, but also collective challenges you may have and data that might be available. And lastly, I can't help but also mention art. Create some art. It's a brilliant way to engage people, and it's playful and fun. So here are some ways to start. And if you're interested in any of this, do come and visit us at doughuteconomics.org, where not only communities, but cities and places, educators, businesses and governments are looking at these ideas and joining this global community of people who are turning them into practice. We're seeing people share stories and create tools that then other people can use. So we have a collective, like a commons of knowledge and practice, which is growing all the time. So with that, I will end and I'll pass back to Charlotte.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rob. So for the next 35 minutes, we have time allocated just for questions and answers. So because there's not too many of us on the call, so hopefully we can see if kind of anyone has questions or not. So can I just ask that potentially if you're comfortable to kind of put the video on, just so that I can see if you've kind of put your hand up. If you don't want to turn the camera on, could you just write your question in the chat box? And now I'll hand it over to you. So does anyone have any questions or comments for Rob? Yes, sorry. So Janine, I can see what you have one, and then Annette will go to after.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for that. I just wanted to ask you, on a practical level and working with communities who might not all be very familiar with the Doughnut model, do you find that you have to do quite a bit of work before they really understand what it's about? Or do you find that people are quite comfortable with the idea and are generally looking for ways to implement it?
So the donut as a shape seems to be quite intuitive. We find that people get it relatively quickly. It's also something which isn't very intimidating when you use the word donut, and people think, how on earth can a donut be related to economics? And so it spikes the curiosity and draws people in. And so it's quite a nice connecting visual in that way. If we look under the skin of what it might mean to recognize the vision of the donut, that's when you bring in more complicated ideas. So regenerative by design, distributed by design are not intuitive to a lot of people. And we're seeing places like Brussels as a city find ways in which they can demystify some of those concepts and bring them to life. I think a great way is using some examples and showing people in their community, in their place, how they might be in practice. So in Edinburgh, for one example of regenerative design is the remakery in Leith, where people are fixing broken items and restoring things, repairing things, and that is a way that we are turning the cycles of the linear kind of wasting system through, so things are reused again. And so that kind of brings it to life a bit. But we're seeing it as quite an intuitive idea.
Great, thanks for that. I also just thinking about things within Edinburgh. There's another meetup group called the Edinburgh Sustainable Group, and they do quite a lot of Doughnut Economics within there. So when lockdown lifts, I'm planning to join their community gardening group. So I live in a flat, so I don't have access to a garden, but everyone can go along, contribute, and then take some of the produce. And then they also have repairs for if you have kind of clothes that are older and need repairing. They'll do that as part of a regenerative cycle. So if we move to Annette, and then Jamie, I see you have your hand up as well.
So first of all, I just want to say I love your presentation. I love the model. I just want to put out that positive shout out. And that as futurists, we should all really pay attention to these different kinds of approaches. I grew up in the era of the WHO Healthy Cities Network model, which this has lots of similar activities. And I want to know kind of what is being done differently around the civic engagement and community involvement piece around this approach, because I feel like these become sometimes one-off activities, and the kind of wax and wane because of having it's usually a core group of the dedicated few. But how do these become engage, are more representative, have greater traction, and have you found the magic formula for that?
So we didn't actually realize that groups would form identities around this. We really thought that it would be tools and ideas that people would take into their existing work. But we've seen this spontaneous creation of local groups. And so it's a very live question. We don't yet know. But I would point to groups like Regen Melbourne, who haven't named themselves around the donut, but they have a vision of what it means to thrive. And they're being very welcoming with these online community workshops. And so I think the view of using the donut as an identity for a group may come and go, but I think the principles behind it, I think, have longevity to them, and so it would be interesting just to see how it evolves and watch this space really. So you'll see kind of on the platform there are groups sharing stories of how they're getting on. So you'll continue to see how that develops over time. But I don't have the direct answer on that, and I think it's a really important question about inclusivity and the diversity of this group. So how do we recognize that we move from groups of initiators to then making the groups really feel welcome for everyone to bring their own voices.
Fab, thank you. So if we move to Jamie, and then Jean, I also see you've got a question in the chat.
Hi, all. Good evening from Leeds. Hi, Rob.
Hi.
So as someone who's worked in local government for nearly 30 years now on sustainability, it's great to have you on board, and having met Kate last time she visited Bradford, there's a clear affinity to a lot of what local councils are trying to do with sustainable development. I suppose there's two bits. One is, how do we acknowledge the journey that has been going on for decades? So how does the donut stop being the new kid on the block? How does it stop being a fad and a fashion? How does it position itself within that toolbox, within that wider set of resources for system change? Because it could be the SDGs tomorrow, or it could be donut today, or it could be, I don't know, community land trusts on Thursday. It could be community allotments on Friday. It's a very competitive space for attention around making a better world at the moment, I suppose. So whether you've got any observations about positioning in that and moving away either from the donut becoming the paramount model or becoming complementary to a lot of other competing demands. And then just an observation really, that we've seeded it with our elected members. I have jumped the gun a little bit by telling you which council that is. So this is a little bit of Chatham House rules. In trying to progress this during COVID, in trying to progress this during and through 10 years of austerity in the UK, in trying to address net zero, it's really problematic for them to understand it from an elected member point of view. So I'd probably, outside of this session, it would be really good to pick up with you about what sort of materials or weigh-in there might be for helping decision makers not feel like they have to spend hours getting their head around the donut, but how we make the donut fit with their political realities and ways of thinking at the moment. And for those of us that have been around the futures world, spreading our bets at the moment, bringing all of these available resources cannot come soon enough. We've waited 30 odd years to really try and make progress with sustainable communities. The real question now is, how do we deliver real practical change as fast as we can?
I'll take your second question first, I think, which is to say, have a look at the tools and stories we're creating the platform, because we're looking to create really easy to understand videos and guides, and for people to contribute them as well, and then to bring them into their work. So we've got the methodology for the city, but we'll also be developing them for the local council as well. But we don't have, as Deal, need to wait for that. Cornwall Council, for example, has already created a donut decision wheel that can inspire others, and that's the spirit in which we're looking for this community to operate in the spirit of reciprocity. So we use the ideas and we share back how we've applied them, and then that can inspire other people. So do have a look at the tools there. On the first one, and the idea of competition, we really see that the donut is complementary to the existing work, that it offers a space for all of those other things that are going on. And it's almost like thinking that underpins all the work that's already going on, but it's like recognizing, this is how it all fits together. And instead of recognizing that we are doing separate activity, recognizing that we're all pitching tents at a festival that we all want to be at, and recognizing we can move between these different tents. But isn't it great that we've become these separate tents or nodes in a wider network? And only can a network be created when new nodes rise. So rather than that competition, we're more seeing it that it's wonderful that more and more of these ideas are emerging.
Just a quick one on that. It's less that I think it's in a competitive space itself. I think within the sustainability sphere, there is so much collaboration going on. That's great. It's when you're up against traditional capitalism, traditional MBAs, traditional models of doing stuff, that it's getting that traction within mainstream. And certainly I'm seeing it now being used within a lot of decision-making tools. It's really beneficial, seeding it in such a way that people are starting to adopt it. And that's really positive from what I've been seeing over the last 2 years, really.
Fab, thank you, Jamie. Jean, I believe you wrote a question in the chat box. Are you happy to ask the question to Rob?
Sure, thank you, Rob. This is very interesting. I work in California, and I'm doing some work with some of the smaller cities that are economically challenged. Do you have examples of working with some of those kinds of organizations? Maybe the Devon example, but large cities often have more resources to help their communities structure this kind of sets of exercises. And I'm wondering if you've got any examples of smaller cities that don't have a lot of resource to either among their staffing or their communities with experience in this kind of work, or monetary resources to provide us.
Yes, the first one that comes to mind is the borough of Barking and Dagenham in northeast London, that is working with an organization called Participatory City. They have a sort of a 5-year experiment to create a participatory ecosystem amongst the residents, and are doing a great job of documenting everything. And they've got a brilliant blog by Tessie Britton that I'd thoroughly recommend reading. Barking and Dagenham is registers on sort of as a sort of quite a lot of social challenges that they recognize that if they could make this idea work there, then it would have a really good chance elsewhere as well. So I would recommend that.
Great, thank you. So I think we have a question from Stephen, and then we'll go to Galdino from the chat.
but it's more an observation more than a question, an observation on Jamie's point, which is that effective change is slow. I mean, it does take 30 years, but the needle is moving. And that's the key point, the needle is moving. For example, tucked in the budget last week, small point, most people missed it. The Bank of England is having its targets changed. In addition to 2% inflation, they are also going to be given an unspecified sustainability target at some point in the future. I would imagine that the Treasury are currently working out exactly what that target will be, but as soon as you start measuring it and start sort of advocating that you achieve it, then that's when effective change will come. So, you know, I would say that change does come, but it's very slow. But then, you know, that will be an effective degree of change. So I guess we just have to keep banging the drum.
Am I the next one?
Yeah, great, thanks. Yeah, Galdino, yeah, please.
Yeah, so the first question is background and references, like what would be like the best benchmarks? Because when you talk about like city level, we always talk like when you show up with an idea and they go like, okay, where this happened? Like what are the numbers? Like what happened there? Or what are the results? Not even the numbers, like let's say, what, if you want to apply it, like what are the best references? And like building on top of what Stephen just said, are you guys familiar with integrated reporting? Because that seems like what corporations or the corporate world is trying to do in this direction, to like other kinds of measurements, because like we're just measuring money for the last whatever years, and when you just measure money, you just have money. At the end of the day, at the expense of everything else, and like integrated reporters seem to be more done it, I say. But like from a corporate perspective, it seems to be one of these connection. But like if you could share some good benchmarks, like for like a city level, would be great.
When you say benchmarks, do you mean examples of other cities that are proving this work?
Things they are applying, things they're doing, like how much effort, money, public power was put in, and how much results, what kind of results they got out and what they didn't get out, like what are the learnings?
Well, I guess in terms of examples, I mentioned Amsterdam. They're the ones that are leading the application of this thinking, and they're doing deep work. They're looking at the design of their city institutions themselves, because they realize they're not currently compatible with the donut. They could say they want to do it, but unless they change the structure of their institutions themselves, they're not going to change. And so they've inspired other cities. The city of Nanaimo are now doing it. Copenhagen. It's very much peer-to-peer inspiration at the moment. So it is early days. They launched the City Doughnut in April last year, and they are beginning to plan around it. And obviously, COVID has been restrictive of how much change can happen. But it's Amsterdam, a city that didn't wait for another city to show that it was going to work. So it's a case of saying, well, if you as a city, either the mayor or the council agree that there's a compelling reason to change, which is patently clear from the state of our global health and social crises, that we need to act, then the case is how are we going to act, rather than necessarily waiting for the exact pathway to be shown by other places. And it's going to be different everywhere. So every city is going to have its own unique challenge. So there's nowhere going to be that's going to have your exact social challenges, your ecological challenges. So I would say that it's not necessarily a time to wait.
No, it's not to wait. It's just I was again like thinking when we make proposals, that's the question you get, and the second answer for that is like, no, but it's Amsterdam, they have a lot of money. I come from Brazil, so like it's always a reference. But the irony I see that is like if you look at the indigenous Brazilian communities, that's how they think. It's circular. It's living in the forest and living with the forest and from the forest. in circular, and we just forgot that. And so it's good that some people are bringing that back.
Mm-hmm. In terms of your second question, in terms of integrated business reporting, a great example of a company that's undergone a transformation is Interface Carpets, where they had a target of growth, and then they recognized, well, we need to be net zero, and then they realized, well, that's not good enough. We need to be completely regenerative by design, and they redesigned their whole factories, and then they worked out all the ways they can layer in benefits to everything they do as an organization. So it's really about shifting the mindset from what's the purpose of our organization? Is our purpose still serving growth? Because if it is, then you can create as many integrated reports as you like, but it's still not going to shift the dial. If you actually recognize our goal is thriving and your whole purpose for being is aligning to that, then it goes to the real core parts of your business. You really have to look at your purpose and your networks, your governance, ownership, and finance, and recognize if your finance is only serving growth, then you're not going to be able to make the transition as well. We're currently developing tools for business, and we have a video on the Deal platform that talks about business in more detail, called When Business Meets the Donut. So it's an area where we recognize there's such a broad spectrum of businesses that were born to do the donut, all the way through to those that are going to have to radically transform to meet the donut. And we're making sure that when those that need to radically transform meet donut economics, we're making sure it's not us that's going to be transformed. So business is such a powerful force. So we're really recognize that, and I'm hopefully going to be working with that in the future. And I'll share the link for that video in the chat.
Great, thank you. If we could go to Brendan now for a question.
Yeah, to follow on from what was said, I think from Leeds about this builds on a lot of pre-existing work. I've been in this area for quite some time. And I also happen to run the Edinburgh Data Visualization Meetup. And from the perspective of knowing about the history of sustainability and the ideas like limits to growth from the 1970s and overshoot is an old idea, and the dispute between ecological economics valuing things in terms of their own existence versus environmental economics trying to put a price on all of nature. All that seems to be new here, and I must confess I've not read the book, is it's a nice new diagram. It's a great new diagram because it communicates intuitively to a lot of people. But it's basically, if you look at it in detail, it's a whole bunch of categories which are all measured on different yardsticks with different units, and they're not all in the same category. And so I'm kind of wondering what is actually new here, apart from the pretty picture.
I'm going to give my view, and I don't know what others think about this in Deal, but I agree with you. I think it's what's new here is a visualization. And how incredible is it that this visualization of two concentric rings makes people go, oh wow, I get it now. And so donut economics is the idea of standing on the shoulders of giants. All the amazing work that's led us here now. Donut economics is a visualization of what exists already. And so it's kind of helping introduce a new language that allow people to say, oh yeah, we're both talking about that. Now, when Kate first came up with the idea, it was just ahead of the Rio +20 conference. And this is before UN Sustainable Development Goals were created. And she went into meetings with different nation government. Now, I can't remember the two specific nations that she references, but they were at odds. They said, no, if that country's talking about it, we don't agree, and vice versa. But she put the donut in the table in front of them and said, oh, but we can get on board with that. And so all of a sudden you've got a convening visual where people can then collaborate across previously divided lines. And I think that's the power of this work. It recognizes we're all connected in this work together because it's all in one visual. So even if it's just that one visual that's been introduced and added to this, it's, well.
So if we can just come back momentarily on that.
Yeah.
I think all of us here recognize that power is unevenly distributed, and the economists and the financiers have a lot more of it than most of us do. So I kind of wonder, it's easy to say yes to a pretty picture that makes intuitive sense, but it doesn't actually compel you to any action. So I'm wondering how this diagram helps speak to those people and their professional expertise, putting prices on things, deciding where resources ought to go preferentially. I'm wondering, does it have any utility there? Because I have my doubts.
Yes, well, absolutely. There, the people who work through the spreadsheets will probably be compelled by different diagrams, and so that's happening at the moment when we speak with cities and who are all the different people involved in these processes, and there'll be a different yeah, absolutely, I completely agree on that point. And in terms of inspiration, we know that, well, what we've seen, we have strong evidence for peer-to-peer inspiration. If that city policymakers doing that over there, why don't we do it over here? If that community members doing that there, we can do that here. Teachers inspiring other teachers, so that peer-to-peer element has got a lot of strength as well.
Thanks.
I think, Esme, yes, do you have a question?
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to type in the chat and dreadful typos. Hello, Rob. Thank you. That's really helpful. And I think I've appreciated your honesty and a couple of questions that have asked about where does this stand. You're not trying to. I'm almost kind of think that if this isn't around for another generation, then that's okay, because it's got to be a thing that speaks to people of the moment. But my question really is about health within that, and just wondering how, in your experience, this work speaks to people in health systems, whether it's kind of healthcare providers or life science people or kind of technology health people. Just interested in if you have any understanding of, or could point me to somewhere where I can understand how that kind of conversation is going.
Yes, absolutely. Well, the donut was first published in the Lancet Planetary Health. And I think what the donut's doing is recognizing that the conversation of health can no longer happen without the conversation about planetary health, and that the two are inextricably linked. And that when we recognize, what are our human systems of health, and, the health of, we're learning more and more about how human health relates to soil health and environmental health. So whilst I don't have a specific answer about how practitioners in the field of health are using it, we know that I know that Kate is involved in a lot of those conversations at a kind of a policy thinking level from global health organizations. So it's I think about reframing health as just within the context of the body to thinking about the wider planetary view.
Great, thank you. I think we have a question from Annette, and then also another question from the chat.
Yes, thank you. One of the things that's important to recognize is the history going back now a few decades. And I want to point people towards the WHO's Healthy Cities Network initiative. And actually it dovetails with the meeting at Alma Alter, where actually a lot of this work is very tightly connected to public health and WHO's work. So there was already a health linkage, but much more about community-based health promotion. And I hail from public health, so I lived and breathed this stuff in the 1990s. And it was actually, in terms of how is this different or how is it important, that WHO work really fueled the work in the United States around Healthy People 2000 and that framework of metrics and measures, and forcing us to take a public health lens, including healthcare's hospitals and healthcare leadership and on the provider side, so that they would actually see the link, in terms of healthcare, public health, and out into the community around housing and a strong, vibrant economy. So know that a lot of this actually comes out of a health perspective. And then in terms of, my sense is that we do probably recreate the wheel in this domain, but maybe that's okay. That we have we have an increasing number of reasonable metrics, and probably the new wrinkle is the repurposed regenerative piece, and that wasn't part of the healthy cities rubric back in the 1990s. So that we keep outing particular models and understandings and linking climate change is the part that we, that is new and is important. And maybe that's okay. We're not recreating, we're continuing to update and refine.
I just add to that in terms of the word regenerative, it's kind of it is followed in the footsteps of sustainability, but we don't want to sustain things as they are now. We need to regenerate and improve the health, not just sustain the health. And I am inspired by the work of biomimicry and of Janine Banyas, and she talks about life that creates conditions conducive to life. And that's a really powerful statement for me. And I kind of think about it in a lot of the work we do. So how do we recognize the things we value and recognize, when we're creating community, how do we create communities that create more conditions for more community? And so, yeah, the idea of, regeneration and cycles of the living world is a powerful kind of foundation to this work. I can share a link to biomimicry, yeah.
Great, thank you. We have a question in the chat from Ioana. Are you happy to unmute and ask the question?
Yeah, thanks. It's not really something that hasn't been said before. I heard the word metrics before, and Brendan put it very well that it seems to be something like a new visualization without resolving the problems of the previous approaches. So SDGs actually require metrics so that we can measure progress of a policy. And I was wondering if the Doughnut Economics, apart from a visualization, is also a general approach just to see people working together. But apart from that, there isn't any particular way of quantifying what's happening. Like we have a purpose and we achieved 50% of our purpose, of our goal, and we are midway and we need to do this much more to achieve it. I didn't see anything like that, although it is based on economics and it should have been based on such measures. So this is what I'm asking. How do we know it works if we don't measure it?
So the global donut is based on globally agreed metrics and measures. So you can look at all of those in the original publication. So the US Sustainable Development Goals create the social foundation, and the scientifically leading system scientists are working on the planetary boundaries. Now, what we measure at a global level might change over time, but those are the best measures we have at the moment. When we downscale it to a city, Amsterdam, Portland, and Philadelphia have gathered the metrics for all 4 of those lenses. So they've gathered data for what they think it means to thrive locally, and they then create the visualization for what it means locally. So they can measure that and understand the thresholds and work towards those. So it's a case of gathering together the available data, but recognizing that what we want to measure, the data might not exist at the moment, but we'll find the best thing we have at the moment, and then when it doesn't exist, we can maybe create it as well.
Just to add something, that one of the problems is that so far the metrics are not very well developed for SDGs, and that's why there are no global or national measurements, and that's why there is no progress, because there is no measurement. So I think it's a vicious circle, and it's kind of passed on Doughnut Economics. That was my main comment about. But yeah, okay, I'm covered from your answer.
If you also, I flashed up 3 national donuts. If you go and visit the Leeds Good Life website, you can see 150 national donuts, and it shows all of the data that's behind there. So that might be a good place to just kind of see how that's working. And in the pipeline is actually a tracked timeline of how that data is changing over time. So you will actually see which countries are moving closer to being the donut and which ones are going further away.
I think we just have one more question from Kelly that you put in the chat. Kelly, are you happy to say the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much. This has been a really great discussion. It's exciting to see Doughnut Economics in action and see what the opportunities are for communities. My question is around what Ayana was just sharing around measuring impact. Wondering if any one of these groups are exploring developmental evaluation as a principle. So I'm still new to that space, but learning a bit from my colleagues about how inviting folks to define the measures that are important to them and then leaving more space to more responsibly address those needs or kind of change course along the way. So anyways, my question just was whether developmental evaluation is like intersecting at all with Doughnut economics.
I don't know too much about developmental evaluation, so I wouldn't be in a good position to answer that. I think that, yeah, unfortunately, I don't know too much, unfortunately.
Totally fine. Thank you.
Sorry.
Fab. Does anyone have any further questions? No, so just as a wrap up for tonight, Rob, thank you so much for giving your presentation, and thank you everyone for the questions and the comments from today. I plan to put this recording online, and I'll share a link of where we can all get it to those who attended tonight and those who aren't able to attend. I'll also download the chat, so any of the web links that people might not have been able to pick up, I can also grab that. I'd like to just do a quick plug for our next series of events. So at the end of March, Edinburgh Futurists will be hosting 4 political, hopefully 5, but the main political parties in Scotland, for them to tell us what their vision for a future Scotland is. And what I would say is that I really encourage anyone who might not have a vote in our general elections in May to come along and really scrutinise what the society might look like within Scotland, and how potentially that could benefit from the diverse views of everyone, how with the different locations that we live in. So with that, hopefully I will see you at a later Futurist event, and if not, thank you for coming along tonight, and thank you again, Rob.
Thank you.